Everybody, and welcome to Beefmaster Banner. We are your host, Josh Morrison and Jared Strickland. How's it going, Jared?
That's going good, man. Finally
Excited
got
about
some sunshine shining.
to dry up the mud.
Yeah.
Uh, Before we get into this episode, just wanted to mention one of our show sponsors, Lissy's Beefmasters. Be sure to check them out. They have Facebook and a website, and they have multiple sales a year. Thank you, Lissy Beefmaster, for supporting the Beefmaster Banner podcast. Um, it means a lot that you let us put your name out there for you. So thank you for that. Tonight we have David Holloway again. We had him on the last episode and talked about what the cattle markets did sort of in the past. Got to know David a little bit. So welcome back, David.
Thanks again for having me.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming back and taking time out of your evening again to talk more. Maybe now and in the future. Let's see what we've got going on. But Jared, I believe you had a question sort of from the last episode. I'll let you start it out.
Yeah, we kind of maybe forgot it or looked over a little bit, but we want to talk a little bit about the exports and how well beef exports were in 22 and kind of how they improved and just particularly in China, an opportunity that may lie ahead for us there. I know Dave, we talked earlier about it that that's something that we need to be looking at. So I was just going to kind of let you take that over and see what you wanted to say about that.
Sure. Well, first let's start with total U.S. beef exports. I mean, obviously have grown in recent years as the world's income has grown and as world appetite for quality beef has grown. I think that's a trend that's well entrenched and is going to continue into the future. Last year, depending on, I mean, there's a lot of different data sets out there that you can look at, but the long and short of it is, growth again last year in absolute volume and in percentage of production. We exported about 12 to 15% of our beef production last year, which continues to rise steadily. Think that's going to continue. Historically, Canada and Mexico were our two biggest trading partners on the beef side. They're still important. That's not going to change. But what we've seen in recent years is growth from other parts of the world, particularly Asia. Japan and South Korea, everybody knows, pretty familiar with that. They've been important parts of the market for a long time. They take high quality beef. One of the things that's really changed in the last probably 3 years or so has been just the growth in China that you mentioned, Jared. I think it's fascinating. The middle class in China is 350 million people. That's bigger than the entire population of the U.S. That segment of the population is growing. A lot of the people in China have moved to the cities. They've got more income. Their diets are changing. Pork's important. We should talk about that a little bit too. But the long and short of it is you've got an emerging market there for high quality US beef. They're not buying the low quality stuff like maybe the perception, but even middle meats, ends, those kind of things. Those are high valued items that drive total dollars back to packers, which get reflected in bids for fat cattle prices, which get reflected into bids for feeders and for calves and for bred heifers and all those other things, all the way back to the ranch level. So I think the Chinese economy with the COVID situation is a little bit of a question mark this year. Hopefully they'll come out of that soon. Travel is going to help as that travel begins to open back up. But again, I think just the changes in demographics and income there make China a really bright spot for U.S. beef exports in the future.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And just kind of we mentioned a little bit about it. They've had they're by far the largest pork producer in the world, and they've had African swine fever for the last year or two, and they're having trouble getting that back going. And obviously the opportunity for the years to come till they get that figured out is good for us and good for our beef exports.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ASF's been a real problem for China that has benefited pork producers around the world here, including the U.S. They use that opportunity to build some state-of-the-art farms. They've got those. They still have ASF issues, I understand, in some of those facilities. They still got some very primitive hog farms. So with all of that, you've got, and then just with a large hog population, obviously, you got a lot of opportunities for disease to spread. They don't have the protocols and the procedures in place that we do here. So that's an ongoing problem for them. Unfortunate for those producers and the Chinese people, but to your point, that creates opportunities for us. From a substitute standpoint, particularly as, again, as incomes continue to grow, one of the things that we do know is when people's incomes grow, they start with vegetable protein and they trade up and they eat fish, and they eat chicken, they eat pork, and then they eat beef. And we see that, going on in China as well. So I think all those things are positive for U.S. beef producers.
I
Well,
definitely
and
believe so.
what do you think as far as the effect? So if China starts buying more, which obviously to other people, so we don't know what they're going to do, but if they start buying more, I mean, our cow herd, I don't know the numbers, Jared and David, you probably do a little better, but I mean, it's such a small cow herd after the sell-offs last year. I mean, you would think that's got to help our cattle markets at some point, this year, next year, going forward, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, demand wherever it comes from is supportive to cattle prices. And I think, we'll get into this probably in a little more detail later, but one of the things there is obviously as supply goes down, the prices, if demand's still there, obviously, that is one of the things that push prices higher. It's basic economics. I think, and maybe we should stop here just for a minute. One of the things I think is really important, as we talk about, um, cattle and we talk about all these other commodity markets. Here's the one thing I think is really important longer term as we think about big picture, for the next 1 to 5 years. The point was just made about how small the cow herd has gotten. And, in the realm of commodity markets, cattle are pretty rare in the sense that they're effectively non-storable. It's not like a bushel of corn or a barrel of crude oil or a bar of gold. So, there's a couple of other things. Hogs and electricity are two that come to mind. It's a pretty short list of non-storable commodities. Then when you add in the long biological lag from the time the rancher makes a breeding decision till that impacts the consumer's plate with either more beef or less beef, then cattle become a very unique commodity, is kind of the way I think about it. And so why is that relevant to this discussion? It goes back to the fact that it requires a price signal to be more pronounced, more stronger. It's my Georgia public school education there for you. It requires a stronger price signal to be more pronounced and to last longer in order to produce a supply response at the ranch level. So I guess said in plain English, cattle prices need to go a lot higher and stay there for a lot longer to bring on enough supply to satisfy beef demand. And I think that's something that's really important for your listeners to think about is, we've dug this hole so deep. I think in the first episode we talked about the herd liquidation and got into that a little bit. And we could dig into a lot of detail that, but the long and short of it is, we've dug a very deep hole. It's going to take a while to get out, But with all the high input costs and everything else, I think that's the function of the market here, is to make basically calf prices high enough for long enough so that cattle producers decide they want to keep more heifers instead of sell them, and they want to grow the herd because it's become profitable for them. And I think, how do you act on that? How does that work? Inventory ownership is a straightforward way to position yourself to take advantage of those prices, or what we think will be rising prices over the next few years. And so I maybe I'm getting a little off track there, Jared and Josh, from where that started, but I think it is related to the export side of the business and that part of the equation, because demand for U.S. beef is growing globally, and we're on the verge of producing less, not more. So that means that prices need to go up, I think.
Right.
Yeah. That fits in well with the question, and kind of leads us into the what everybody's probably really waiting for is how good is it going to get, or is it going to get better? Just kind of tying it all together. I was having a conversation actually today. We were kind of looking at booking some fertilizer to put on. Obviously, in the southeast, we have to use it or we won't have much grass. But nitrogen prices have come down, I would say, significantly. We were looking at $600 something a ton for urea instead of 1,000 like it was in the spring of last year. So, how's that going to affect? I guess, how does that affect? We're still in high feed prices with corn up. I mean, is people with lower fertilizer prices, they're going to plant more corn to drive that down, or what are you seeing on that to kind of help? I mean, inputs are going to have to come down to drive fed cattle prices higher, I think, but I could be wrong.
Well, I may be wrong too, but I'll give you my opinion. That's why you have me on, and it's just that it's my opinion. But let's start there first with the hay. I mean, hay prices are obviously all-time record high, just blasted higher last year. All hay prices, prairie hay, alfalfa, everything went up. Obviously, we talked earlier about the drought. That was a big part of the reason why that they went up. But again, if the long-term forecasts are correct on the weather, and we start transitioning from this La Nina back to an El Nino pattern, then we should get more rainfall nationwide. And it's going to take a while to break the drought, but we should get more hay production this year than we had last year. That's the supply side. The demand side then is, with less cows, then there's obviously less demand. So if you have more supply and less demand, that means prices should come down. So I think we should be close to the top in the hay market. On the corn side, old crop corn is still very tight. We see that in basis levels. We see that in flat price. So, we're certainly not out of the woods there yet. Argentina is really dry, and that's creating some problems. Brazil is off to a really good start. So the Southern Hemisphere crop on balance looks, like it's going to be a pretty decent crop. Then we're going to talk about Northern Hemisphere planting. I mean, here it is in January, but it won't be long, and some of those farmers in the deep South and the Gulf Coast areas, they'll be planting corn in another month or so. With these kind of price levels, to your point, with fertilizer prices coming down, Jared, and these kind of prices, I mean, you got to think there's going to be a lot of corn acres planted this year. I mean, that's yet to be seen. Is it going to be 91, 92, 93 million acres, grow a trendline yield? Then, does that put us at a 15 billion bushel corn crop? If it does, particularly with where the export business has been on corn, China has been absent from the U.S. corn market for a while. And obviously that can change, but at this point, we're just not competitive on the world market, on the world corn market. So that probably means that, there's significant downside in new crop corn prices, assuming we grow a crop here. So I think that will be a tailwind for all classes of cattle. I mean, for feeder cattle, for calves, so on and so forth.
I think it's spot on. I mean, I truly do. And I, you know, and it sounds to me like what you're thinking, David, is that we feel like we're going to have higher cattle this year. Obviously the economy has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so yeah, switching gears and going over to the cattle market. I mean, here are my thoughts. I'm a supply bull when it comes to cattle. I think the supply has peaked. It's coming down. It's going to come down this year. It's going to be smaller next year. You know, for 3 or 4 or 5 years, we could be looking at a smaller cattle supply, smaller beef production. So, you know, just to throw some numbers out there, I mean, on the fat cattle market, I think the market, you know, this year's 150 to 170, maybe higher, depending on, you know, later in the year, depending on how tight supplies get, when heifer retention starts, all those kind of things, as it impacts the number of cattle going into the feed yard and whatnot. Calves and feeders, you know, I think that market's going higher. That could be even better. Cows, replacement heifers, higher, you know, probably not this year, but if we get, as we talked, some good rains and higher prices and people sell, you know, higher price cattle this year and their input costs are lower, as we just mentioned, then, you know, next year, 2024, you could really see the female market just launch, I think. You know, we the guys at Next Gen hear me say this are probably tired of it and they probably laugh at me, but I think of replacement females, whether heifers or cows, as the picks, the shovels, and the mules of the gold mining era. You know, the people who made money during the gold rush weren't necessarily the prospectors. The people who made money were the guys who sold all the stuff to the prospectors, and that's kind of how I view the female market going forward. Is, you know, that's where the easy money should be made. So we'll see, but you know, some things have to fall into place for that. So from a supply side, I mean, clearly, you know, it's pretty obvious that supply is in the process. The pipeline is emptying out, and it takes, as we all know, a long time to rebuild that. The one thing that's a little bit of a concern is the demand side. We've got all-time record high beef prices. You know, there's a lot of concern. A lot of people who are a lot smarter than me are very concerned about the economy. You know, you see the layoffs across several different industries. Those headlines seem to come across just about every day, if not every 2 or 3 days. You know, the Federal Reserve this week told us, you know, basically they're going to keep interest rates higher, which, you know, the whole purpose of that is to slow things down. You know, everybody sees that around them in a lot of different ways. So as inflation continues to take a bite out of people's disposable income, and you know, people have to change their habits, how does that impact beef prices and ultimately cattle prices? A couple of things I think there. One is retail margins are still very wide. So I think there's some cushion in the system there. Packer margins, as we mentioned in the first episode, you know, really have been, they've gone from record wide over the last couple of years to basically back to even. So you don't have as much cushion there, but at the same time, you know, as we start to reduce supply, then wholesale prices hopefully will keep up with that. That'll keep cattle flowing through the system. But in any case, even if the demand side, you know, we obviously have some headwinds there and it slows down. We've been at record levels of demand. So if we back off, even with that, we can still see cattle prices steady to higher across all classes of cattle, just because the supply has been cut so much more than the demand retreats. I don't see that as a one-for-one relationship or pressure on prices at all. You know, so I guess there was two things I did want to mention. as we talk about markets. And so while we're here, we'll just go ahead and throw those out there. One of them is the thing you just mentioned, Josh, and that's the demand side. What does that look like? The second thing, and this is very intangible, this is very, seat of the pants. But the second thing that keeps me awake at night is everybody's bullish. We're all reading the same mail. Everybody knows what's happened to supply. Everybody knows demand's good. We've had 2 straight years of a price rally without any meaningful setback. That's unprecedented. We're at altitude. The air's very thin in these prices. I do think ultimately we're going to, prices are going to go higher over time into new highs. But when everybody gets on one side of the boat, like we all are now, that's when surprises happen. And in this case, everybody's bullish. We're at high prices. So the surprises may be bearish here. And we just got to be prepared for those. Again, back to the game plan, what's your marketing game plan, those kind of things. That's why, we're maintaining some hedges just because of that, because of the unknown, because of the equity tied up in cattle and those kind of things. You want to protect that, but still give yourself some upside. One of the things that we do know, if we were to get a significant break in cattle prices, we know what to do with that. The risk reward changes significantly in that scenario, and so that's something where you could take a bigger bite out of the apple and feel good about it, I think.
Well, I always kind of mention the risk you talk about when everybody is on the same side of the trade. It's kind of a stair step up, but if it changes, it's an elevator down. And
exactly.
Kind of like what everybody saw back in 16, or into 15, 16. That's what scares me sometimes thinking about, talking with people. You see all this liquidation going on, and to drive the female market like you were talking about, people is going to have to either get back in or expand. And I still know a lot of people that expanded in 2014 and still ain't come out of that hole yet, and they're going to remember that.
Yep.
And that's why I see maybe a cap on top of the female market is that. But and again, if like you saying, if calf prices get to the point where it really tempts people to come back into the market and expand their herd, it's going to drive the prices up.
Yeah, and that's probably 2 or 3 years down the road, I would think, before we get there. I mean, I think the first step is you got to have grass, and then you got to be able to sell a calf crop or two to recover some of the losses that you mentioned, even going back from 2014, a few years back, or just from the losses of the last couple of years, and maybe not even on the revenue side, but on the cost side to recoup some of that. So I think from that standpoint, just healing up financially takes a little time, even though some of the production conditions may be there and they may exist. The checkbook may not allow that just yet, but I think we're putting all the pieces in place for that to happen. But it may be a couple, 3 years down the road. But again, given the time that it takes to put a plan into motion and action, that's one of the good and the bad things about our business, I guess, is that biological lag. It's not growing a corn crop every year. It's not growing a pig crop or chickens. It takes a while and you have to plan ahead. So, and I guess that's kind of my whole hope for this podcast is for your listeners is, to get them start thinking about that. What's your plan? What are you going to do? We can see these opportunities unfolding. How are you going to take advantage of that? Be prepared, particularly, as the market rallies sharply, as the market breaks sharply. What does that mean to you for your operation? How do you react to that? And how do you, grow inventory and equity at the same time through that?
No,
Yeah,
like that.
definitely agree with that.
I agree 100%.
Kind of talking about takes time. I think I'd read a report today that there's probably going to be, and you may correct me if there's probably going to be about 1 million head of feeder cattle or fat cattle or feeder cattle not coming into the feedlots over the next 23 years because of the slaughter and things like that. I mean, that's a lot of beef that's not going to be put on the market.
Yep.
And our listeners know that you have a heifer born today, it's 2 years before she has a calf at the earliest. And like you're saying, and I agree with you, David. I think we got some good times ahead if we could get things going in the right direction.
The supply side certainly is the tailwind here. The demand side is the question mark right now. But on balance, it seems like from a risk reward perspective, it's a pretty good business decision. It seems to me.
Yeah, I agree. So I guess maybe the magic question, and maybe you can share some of what is next gen's plan with the info that we're seeing now. Can you give us an idea of what next gen? I mean, because obviously everyone knows next gen. They've got tons invested in this, and maybe that'll help them make some decisions also.
So a couple of things. One is, I mean, the internal conversations we have are exactly the same conversation. What we see unfolding is an opportunity to own inventory. Prices are going higher. The way we take advantage of that in any market is to own inventory in a rising price environment. So I think that's the starting point, and that's the foundation of where we talk about that, from what that means to next gen. We, as I mentioned, we're gonna, from what I do, we're gonna keep some hedges on. We're gonna be smart about that. We're gonna take risk when the market tells us to. On the cattle side, on the corn side, we talked about that earlier. You've gathered. I'm still friendly old crop. I'm a little negative new crop. So we have, for months and months and months, we've owned corn for the cattle that we have in the feed yard. We continue to own corn. We're going to, probably own less corn for new crop as assuming that we see, things developing in a more bearish way, as we mentioned. So I think that's, kind of important. The futures market thinks corn market's going to be cheaper. We talked about the hay market, nothing there. I think the other thing from a broader perspective, from a next gen look, is, we're going to offer some great breeding bulls and females to our customers to rebuild herds with. One thing that came out of the 2010, 11, 12 liquidation was a step change in genetics. We sold off the bottom end of the herd, and what was left and what, came out of that was a much better overall herd. And I think producers reap the rewards of that. This past year's a textbook example of that. Look at what happened. Choice select spread, the prime beef market. Consumers responded to that, and they paid more money for that. So I think, that's a tangible response to herd improvement. So we're trying to do our part in that regard as well. And then, just developing those top tier genetics that are a seamless fit for ranchers who want to improve profits while producing better beef. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, I am the last guy that should get down into the weeds on this. And so you should have some of the other guys on to talk about those things. But especially since I'm the numbers guy and not the production guy, it's fascinating. The talent that Next Gen has and the resources available, just to me, to answer dumb questions. I mean, I'm not going to name names, but there's one of the guys who's very patient with me, and he says, Holloway, you got to look at it this way. We're standing out there looking at these bulls. If you're a baseball team and you need a shortstop, you ignore all these other bulls over here because they're outfielders, they're hitters, they're all this other stuff. These are the catchers over here. These are the shortstops. So they have to dumb that down to my level so I can understand that. But what I do understand is, there's guys there who have spent their entire career developing better genetics. I hate to name names, but Bill Pendergrass had heterosis. That's something that he's really helped me understand from the standpoint of genetics that help the rancher be more profitable and what next gen's doing in that. I'm not even going to attempt to discuss that, but that might be another idea for a podcast. But I think those are the two things, what we're doing market wise specifically and how we're approaching that. And then two, next gen and how we can contribute to that improvement in the herd and rancher profitability and beef genetics. I think those are the two broad areas where I'd say, that's kind of what next gen's plan is. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question, guys?
It does, absolutely.
Perfect.
And I really hate it, but we are completely out of time once again. I feel like we could talk for days on this, but I'd like, and I feel sure Jared would feel the same, maybe midway through the year or most way through the year, get you back on and we'll see kind of what it's doing. And we'll talk back about what we talked about in these 2 episodes. And I think that would be a fun time if you'd be willing to do that.
Absolutely. Anything I can do to help, guys, reach out anytime. And I don't know if this is helpful, but I'm more than happy to share any thoughts that I have. So thanks again. I appreciate it.
I really, really enjoyed it. And I think the listeners will too. I'm one of the guys that I'm kind of like you. I like the numbers and look it over, and I really enjoyed this. So really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. Thanks again. Thanks again, Mr. David. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. And all listeners, wish all of you a great 2023, happy, prosperous, and let's go make some money.
Absolutely. We'll see y'all on the next episode. Well, we want to thank everybody for listening to the Beefmaster Banner podcast. Please know that we are on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and we are on YouTube. Just search Beefmaster Banner. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. We love hearing from you. And we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.